All right, good morning, everyone. I won't be able to hear you, but hopefully you can hear me. And if you can't, please feel free to type in the chat box. But we're gonna go ahead and get started. My name is Caroline Martin. I am the K-12 Programs Manager on the CCTE team. My work focuses a lot on career awareness in elementary grades, exploration, and middle grades, and advising in high school. And so really excited. Career assessments are a big piece of that, so excited to be with you all this morning.
And hi everyone, my name is Molly Knowlton. I am the IES grant manager in our CCTE division. I work on a large federal grant that focuses on college and career readiness. And so this is kind of one component of lots of the stuff that we work on as part of the grant. So we're really looking forward to sharing the session with you today.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about all things career assessments in middle grades and providing some guidance on selection of a career assessment if you haven't chosen one already, as well as some implementation best practices. This session is probably most closely connected to our academics bucket of our strategic plan, so ensuring that all students have access to a high quality education no matter where they live, and particularly relates to the career exploration piece of this. The information that students get from career assessments can really make that exploration in middle school really high quality and help them be set up for success when they get to high school. So I'm going to start by just going through our agenda, but before we do that, we would love to get a pulse on who's here in our session with us. And we have a poll that is on the left-hand side of the web page for this session. If you all could go ahead and, if you haven't already, put in there what your role is, if you're a CTE educator, if you are an administrator, counselor, CTE director, or other. We'd love to know who you are. Wish we could all introduce ourselves. That'll help us know who is in our session. While you're doing that, I'm going to quickly go through our agenda. So we're going to start with a quick icebreaker to get a sense of career assessments all of you may already be using. And then we'll talk about the benefits of career assessments, why these are so important for the middle school grades. We'll go over Public Chapter 108, what that bill is, what exactly it says, and then we'll spend some time talking about factors to consider when selecting a career assessment, as well as best practices for implementation. And I want to say here that those two sections are really informed by conversations that we have had with practitioners in the field. From two specific projects. One is the U-Science pilot. So we got a lot of feedback from districts who implemented U-Science as their middle school career assessment this past school year on what was really helpful for them, what were some of the challenges. And so we learned a lot from that. We also learned a lot from our qualitative research projects that we did this past fall with some of our districts across the state that were working on building a college-going culture, and career assessments were a big piece of that. So you're going to see the information that we'll be going over is informed straight from practitioners, our conversations with counselors, administrators, teachers, and students about career assessments. And then we really hope to have some time at the end to hear a bit from you all, what you are doing with career assessments, what barriers you face, what supports that you still need. So that is our agenda for this session. Our goals are that by the end of this session, that all of you would feel very equipped to meet the requirements outlined in Public Chapter 108, but also select the most appropriate career assessment for your school or district, and determine a plan and strategies for successful implementation to really take full advantage of all that a career assessment can provide students in terms of career exploration. And then, of course, we also want you all to feel equipped in developing strategies to mitigate against COVID-19 disruptions or adapt the way that you do a career assessment to a virtual or hybrid environment. We know that COVID is on the top of all of our minds, and it's affecting every aspect of what we do with our students. And so this is no exception. And so we're going to be wanting to think about that and talk about that throughout this session. So we would like to start by hearing from you all, if you are using a career assessment, which one you are using and how you chose that assessment, what factors you considered for making that decision. So if you could type in the chat which career assessment you use if you are already using one, and if you can, provide just a little bit of a sentence or two about the factors that you use to make that decision. I'm going to give a few minutes for folks to put that in. I see Major Clarity. That's one that you'll see in a bit. Katie Martin. Major Clarity. Sometimes this chat feature gets frozen, and so you all may be putting things in that aren't showing up. Here we go. ONET. I love it. That's why I'm here. I need to find a good free tool. We know cost is definitely an important factor. We'll be talking about that. U-Science. Jared Wilkerson said ONET provided best overall they've seen for measuring impact of interests and skills. Those are two types of career assessments. We're going to be talking about different types. Okay, feel free to keep putting those in there. ONET. I'm gonna keep going for sake of time, but it's really great to hear the different assessments you all have found helpful. We're going to talk more about specifics and kind of different characteristics of each in this session. So if you go to the next slide, we're going to start with benefits of career assessments. We just want to start by talking about why middle school and why career assessments are really important during this time. You know, our middle schoolers are just it's a very unique time. I taught 7th grade for multiple years, loved crazy middle school students. But we also know that research shows that middle school is a really unique time in terms of students psychologically. It's a time when students are able to, they haven't made huge permanent decisions yet about kind of how they see their future. They're still open and kind of malleable in a way to being open to different potential future careers. But they also are psychologically in a place where they can start to be reflecting more and have more self-awareness. And so it is just a prime time for them to be exposed to a lot of different options and to be guided through some self-exploration as well. So we know that career and technical education is becoming increasingly more important to introduce and to emphasize before high school, so that students, when they get to high school, can be informed to make some pretty important decisions about courses, about what they get involved in, and the post-secondary options that they're considering. And career assessments play a really big piece in that. So they help really accomplish a lot of these benefits. The first one, with gaining awareness and exposure to a wide variety of careers. Career assessments are going to expose students to the 16 career clusters, the skills that are required for each of those, and kind of level the playing field for students in what they're exposed to. We know that different students are exposed to different kinds of careers depending on where they live, depending on the kinds of careers that their family members have. And so a career assessment can help make sure that all students are aware of the wide variety of options available to them. They also can play a big role in increasing self-awareness. So career assessments can help students identify their personal skills, their personal interests, and use those personal results to form an occupational identity. The next two aren't as informed by a career assessment. That's more going to come from courses that students may take in middle school, so developing employability skills and foundational technical skills, depending on the courses available at your school. But these last two, the career assessment really does help a lot with. So being positioned to make more informed educational choices and then transitioning to high school with an actionable plan. When career assessments are used to their fullest potential and really effectively, students are able to take their results and have multiple opportunities to apply them to decisions and to projects and things that they're learning in their other courses in middle school. So career assessments are a very important piece of really successful career exploration in middle school. If we go to the next slide. Thank you, Molly. Oh, I can skip through those. So I did just want to touch, I know that probably not a lot of us are counselors in this session, but the things that career assessments do and the opportunities that they give students are so important that they are included in the standards for counselors. So, and this text is really small, but I just wanted you to be able to see that there are multiple standards that a career assessment helps counselors accomplish for middle school students. And while most people are probably not counselors in here, it is important to know that there are a lot of standards that career assessments are helping accomplish for students, and it's a great place for collaboration between CTE teachers especially and counselors to be able to reinforce those connections between a student's results and what you're teaching in your classroom. If we go to the next slide, as you know, I have dug into the circle a lot. I quickly found out that there is some confusing terminology when it comes to career assessments, and there are actually multiple different types. So I wanted to take just a minute to go through some of the 5 of the main types that you will see in a lot of the programs that are on our approved list and a lot of the programs that you all are using. So first, just broadly, a career assessment is a tool used to help a student understand how a variety of attributes impact the student's potential success and satisfaction with different career options and work environments. Just wanted to state this is a definition so that we're all on the same page. But then within that, there are a lot of different types. So I'm going to start with aptitude assessment. That's probably a type of assessment that you've heard about. This is emphasized by U-Science. So if you're using U-Science, they have an aptitude assessment. An aptitude assessment measures a student's natural ability to do something. So you can think of it as like their innate strengths and talents. These are things that generally do not change over time. So some examples are numerical reasoning, sequential reasoning, spatial visualization, things that aren't going to change very much throughout someone's life. The other 4 are things that can definitely change over time. So the next one is an interest assessment. This is different in that it measures students' likes, their dislikes, their enjoyments in terms of courses, tasks, people, jobs, and that can change over time. What a student might be interested in elementary or 7th grade will change as they're exposed to more and more things. The next is a personality assessment. This measures a student's personality traits, their preferences, their motivations, their communication style. This can also change over time. Then there's a skills assessment. This is different from an aptitude assessment in that skills are things that students have learned, so either in school or out of school, but it measures something that a student has worked on, they've studied for, they've learned over time, and those can be skills that can be marketable or advantageous to them in specific careers. And then lastly, the values beliefs assessment. This identifies students' beliefs about what's important to them in their future work, what will make it meaningful for them. An example could be that a student prefers to work in a collaborative work environment versus more individually and on their own. So different vendors and platforms emphasize some of these more than others. All of them are very helpful for students to consider as they're learning about different careers and which ones maybe they may be most suited for, to find satisfaction and success in. But knowing which of these, your platform or program that you have, knowing which ones that focuses on can help you provide, ensure that you provide some supplementary opportunities for students to reflect on and identify some of the factors that may not be included in your chosen program. So we know that career assessments are really important in middle grade, and that they provide a lot of opportunity for students to learn and explore different careers. And because of that, in April of 2019, there was a bill passed, and it's called Public Chapter 108, that requires an assessment to be conducted and administered in the middle grade. So a public chapter, just if you're unfamiliar with that terminology, is just, like I said, a bill that's passed by the legislature, by the General Assembly, outlining some requirements by different bodies. So Public Chapter 108, this is the language that is in that bill, and it basically says that in the first paragraph at the top, that the Department of Education is responsible for identifying an approved list of assessments that LEAs can administer. And then it requires LEAs in that 1 and 2 to both make an assessment available to middle schoolers and administer it in 7th or 8th grade. And you may notice that the terminology, we just went over the different types. The terminology used in this bill is aptitude and interest. And so just keep that in the back of your mind. That'll be important in a few slides when I explain how we came to our approved list. So I wanted to show you just the language in there. And next, I want you to be able to see the list of approved. There we go. So this is our current list of approved career assessments. This list, as well as information about the criteria we use to come to this list, which I will explain in a second, and all of the different unique characteristics and factors about each of these is included in a document that's linked to our CTE web page of the TDOE website. It's also uploaded into the files section of this session on the CTE Institute site as well. So you have access to this and a lot more information about these that we'll be talking about in the next few slides. I also want to say that if you do not see, if you are using an assessment that you don't see on here and you believe that it meets the criteria that I'm about to review, you can definitely reach out to me and we can review that. So I'm now going to give a brief overview of how we got to this list. So first of all, as we saw in the bill does emphasize aptitude and interest as the types of assessments that are really important. And so the first thing we did was make sure that we narrowed down to a list that had either an interest assessment or an aptitude assessment, or both, but it had to have one of those two. And then we conducted a literature review of what research says about how the factors that are really important for a career assessment to have the intended impact on students and their ability to make decisions with that information. So we came to these five criteria. The first three, all of the assessments had to meet, and then the criterion 4 and 5 are optional, but they do make some of the assessments and programs stand apart and stand out. So the first criterion is that the program needs to develop a direct and psychological connection between success in schools and post-graduation paths or goals. There has to be an opportunity for students to see that connection between academics and career or future plans. The second is that it supports individualized learning for youth. So This just means that it's not just providing information, it's helping students identify their personal interests, their personal aptitudes, and be able to learn something about themselves through the assessment. The third criterion is that the selected program plays into multiple DOTS levels or goes very deeply into one. So DOTS, DOTS is a framework for career exploration that's research-backed, and there is also more information linked to that on the matrix document that I mentioned previously. I'm not going to go into that deeply right now, but the DOTS framework includes components of self-awareness, opportunity awareness, decision learning, and transition learning, which research shows are really important components of career exploration. So then number 4 is one that not all of the approved programs have, but it can be really helpful, and that is including an assessment of career beliefs in addition to the aptitude or interest measures. And then criterion 5 is that the program supports high levels of teacher or counselor guidance and integration of assessment into broader support and guidance structures through curricula. Number 5 is optional in that some of the approved career assessments do not come with an entire curriculum in that program. Some are just one-off assessments. We'll talk about that in a minute. We do know that when career assessments are integrated into a broader curriculum, they are more effective. It gives more opportunities for students to make connections between their results, excuse me, and decisions that they're making about courses or that they're making about some of their assignments in other classes. And so having those multiple touch points with a student's results is really important. And so if you do choose an assessment that doesn't have a curriculum, because we know that a lot of those are going to cost more money, so that's another factor, that you are creating your own. So that is criterion 5, that it's integrated into a broader curriculum. So now that we have gone over what a career assessment is, the benefits of a career assessment, as well as our criteria for creating our list, I do want to pause here and just give you a chance to ask any questions, because I know that we just gave a lot of information. Want to take a quick pause before we get into factors for selecting and implementing. You see, will the PowerPoint be uploaded into the files? We can definitely do that, yes. We have just a little bit more time. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in there. Okay, if you do have questions and they come to you later throughout the presentation, we'll have time at the end, so definitely keep track of those. Molly is now going to get into the factors for selecting a career assessment as well as implementing.
Great, thank you so much, Caroline, for sharing all of that great information. As she mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about selecting and implementing career assessments. I'm going to be pulling out some images from documents that are already available to you on our CTE website, as well as on the TDOE website. So if there are things that are small or hard to read, just know that they're in reference to those other documents that you will have access to. So we're going to talk a little bit about how do you pick which career assessment would be the best fit for your school. You know, I know many of you may already be using career assessments, so maybe you're considering different ones, or maybe you're looking to pick one for the first time. So we've developed, after, as Caroline mentioned, engaging with stakeholders who have been doing this already, a list of things that we think are important to consider as you're picking which career assessment right for your school. So the first thing that we believe is really important is to understand which grade levels you want to administer the test to, and making sure that you're picking an assessment that's grade level appropriate. And while the bill specifically talks about 7th and 8th graders, obviously you may be thinking about this for your entire middle school or for middle school and high school. And so just thinking intentionally about what that looks like. The different career assessments that have been approved are structured really differently in terms of their focus on grade levels. So some career assessments, like you can see in the first column, have unique components, different modules that are designed for middle school students and high school students. So they're actually different assessments that students take depending on what grade level they are in. The middle column, these assessments are designed to be used in any grade 6 through 12. Of course, we know that the kinds of support that a 6th grader may need in doing one of these assessments may be really different than a 12th grader. So that will be an important consideration if you're choosing one of those assessments in the middle column. And then finally, there are some assessments that are specifically designed for high school, but may be appropriate for more advanced 8th graders or with appropriate support. So just considering what is a high priority for you in your school or district in terms of actually selecting which assessment based on the grades that you're planning on administering the assessment to. We also know that determining the information, that you need to determine the information your chosen platform or assessment is measuring. So as Caroline mentioned, there are all these different types of assessments, things that measure aptitude, things that measure interest, personality, skills, etc. We know that all of those things are important. And so thinking about if your chosen assessment focuses just on one or the other, how can you bring in some of those other components as supplementary support for the students? So they're not just thinking about their aptitudes, they're also thinking about their skills, beliefs, personality, all of those components as well. As you can see, we do have a matrix developed that outlines which of the assessments focus on these different categories. Some of them, as you can see, like virtual job shadow, major clarity, college for TN, kind of focus on different areas, but none of them address all of these different factors. So just, again, important to make an intentional choice about which ones you want to select, what your priorities are, and how you're going to support students in those other content areas. Next, as Caroline mentioned, the curriculum support is really important to these career assessments. So we all know that kind of one and done experience is not as effective as really developing the opportunity for students to fully engage in the outcomes of their assessment beyond just the moment when they're taking that test. So some of these assessments have full curriculums that you can implement that accompany the assessment. These tend to be cost money, which we know is challenging at any time, but particularly now. So thinking if you are not going to use an assessment that comes with an established curriculum, I think Caroline mentioned this already, what are you going to do within your building to incorporate this learning into either curriculums that already exist? Maybe you already have a college and career curriculum that this can be incorporated into, or maybe you need to think about how you might need to develop one to support the work of the assessment. So here is a list of a breakdown of which assessments have an embedded curriculum and which one are standalone assessments. So you can see we've included some of each for you. One is not necessarily better than the other in that regard, but we do believe it is really important to have that curricular component. So if you're not using one, if one doesn't come with the assessment you're using, then it's important to do something to, like I mentioned, supplement that. Next, cost is a big factor. I know someone mentioned in the comments they're looking for a free assessment that they can do. There are a really wide range of costs associated with these assessments. Some of them are free and some of them have kind of modular components that you kind of pay for add-ons. Some of them are kind of wholesale, you just buy the whole thing, and it varies widely. So one of the first questions needs to be, do you have a budget to purchase an assessment, as well as any necessary training and resources? So maybe you have the budget for the assessment, but if there are additional costs required to make sure that everyone in your building is appropriately trained on the assessment, then that is an important thing to understand at the outset. We know that with COVID, budgets are even more tight than they were before. So just thinking carefully and intentionally about this will be really important. So here's a breakdown of the assessments in terms of free, low cost, and high cost. I will mention that in the list of free assessments, for example, UScience has pieces that you can pay for, like the analytics, like pieces of the curriculum, but middle school students can actually take the assessment piece for free. So just because it's in the free list doesn't mean that everything associated with the assessment is free, but at least the actual, the assessment that goes to students is free. So again, just something to kind of think about depending on what your needs are within your building, how you're planning on using the assessment. Caroline, was there something else?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it lists here low cost, high cost, that, you know, it's subjective. I would just kind of reframe that as lower and higher cost comparatively to the other assessments that are listed here. There is a range of costs within that high cost column. And that information, the way to access that information is all listed in that informational document as well, that is on our site and on the session files. So just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks for clarifying. Yeah, absolutely. But there are some really high quality assessments that are free, as we mentioned. So just thinking really carefully about what your budget is going to look like for this year, obviously will be critical in conjunction on what your goals are for your students. And then finally, it is really important to think about what resources you have within your school in order to administer this assessment. So all of these assessments have some kind of online component. Some also have something that can be printed out or a paper-based piece. But if you're doing, of course, a computer-based assessment with all students, they need to have the appropriate devices. You need to have access to internet, all of these things in order to run the program successfully. Now, we know you're thinking about all of this already because of COVID and what students can do at home and what they can't do at home. If they're at home, what kind of access to resources they would need to be able to do this. So this is just one more thing, one more piece of the puzzle that needs to be considered for many of these assessments, since a lot of them are computer-based. I think one of the advantages is some of these assessments can be, with a little direction at the outset, administered, or students can take them kind of on their own or at their own pace. So that may be a great thing to think about if you're trying to consider what types of activities students can do independently at home. So just, again, one more thing to think about in terms of picking which assessment is going to be best for your school. Caroline, are there any questions about selecting an assessment before I talk about implementation?
I haven't seen any questions, and again, I apologize if this is freezing and you've put it in. Hopefully we'll be able to see them all by the end, but I don't see any questions about selecting. I do see a question from Jen Cooper about when these tests usually are administered, and that's a great question. I would say that it definitely depends on kind of the structures at your school and your district. So some schools have like an 8th grade, and I think that's here. There's an 8th grade career exploration course and that's a great context in which a student can take the assessment. I have definitely had conversations with schools where they prefer to do it earlier than that in 7th grade, so that students like Ms. Cooper said here, as they reflect, things are changing every year. Number one, they might have different thoughts in 8th grade that they did in 7th grade, but also so that at the beginning of 8th grade, when they're starting to think through either the courses they're taking in 8th grade or the courses they'll take in high school, that they've already been introduced to some of this information. So it's a great thing to think about, and I do think it varies based on the opportunities that are at your school.
Great, thanks, Caroline. And as Caroline mentioned, feel free to continue to add questions into the chat as they come up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about implementation. We know, of course, as you all do, right, the effectiveness of the assessment it can be very much attributed to the supports and engagement of the students and the school that they've received as they're kind of rolling it out and getting appropriate buy-in, both from those that are administering the assessment as well as for students who are taking it. That sometimes can be more important than the actual assessment itself in terms of whether or not you see it as an effective strategy. So thinking really carefully at the beginning about how you're going to implement the assessment will help set you up for success. Now, I know that all of you, I'm sure, have implemented new programs, new strategies, different things within your building. Given COVID and all of the different things that are happening, some of the strategies you've used in the past may not work the same way this year. So we think it is, even though there's a lot to balance right now, it is really important to think carefully about how you're going to introduce this and roll it out within your school or district. A lot of these strategies that we're going to talk about are based on feedback, particularly from the implementation of our U-Science pilot, as well as our feedback from some of the qualitative work that Caroline and I have done with districts as well, as we talked about before. But a lot of the kind of nuanced specifics do come from stakeholders that have been trying to do these in their buildings. So getting started. As you are beginning to plan for the implementation of a career aptitude assessment within your school, it's really important to make clear plans that ensure that everyone in the building understands the goals and objectives of the new initiative. So planning for the implementation logistics should be done at the outset to ensure that there's enough time, resources, and capacity available to really do this successfully. And so these three components are the foundational steps or building blocks to the successful implementation. So outlining the necessary logistics associated with the assessment, how are you actually going to physically do this, how else students' results may be used throughout the school building, and including those individuals in the early planning process. So instead of just tacking it on to one of the many things that those individuals need to address the students later, bringing them into the planning phase is important. And then holding a kickoff meeting, whether it's virtually or in person, depending on where you are, with administrators, teachers, counselors, to really talk about the goals of the program, the importance of the initiatives, and set those really clear expectations with faculty and staff. If, as you know, it's really hard to get students to be bought into something if the teachers and staff in the building aren't bought into it. So getting that very clear at the beginning will be important. And of course, given COVID and all of the uncertainty around reopening and back to school, some of this may depend and change as your plans change. So just being able to document it really clearly and again, make a clear plan will be important for success. In terms of training and support, in order to successfully implement a career assessment, the assessment administrator needs to have the appropriate training and support so they're prepared to guide students through the process. This includes any technical or content support. So if it's a new platform, new systems, things that people may not have used before, making sure that everyone's really comfortable with that platform as well as the content that's being delivered to students. So providing or coordinating appropriate technical training for the assessment administrators on the test, ensuring that the assessment administrators have enough time to actually execute the assessment with students and provide appropriate follow-up. This we found was a big challenge for test administrators. Maybe they built in enough time to actually do the assessment, but they often ran out of time to do the appropriate follow-up with students. So making sure that you are building enough time and capacity to do both. And then develop training for other faculty and staff members that may be utilizing the results to support students. So ensuring that not just the individuals that are administering the assessment, but also any of those other individuals that may be able to use the results in their different content areas. Again, it's important to make sure that they're really familiar with the content and language of what those assessments look like. We know that everyone right now is being asked to do a million different things. And so thinking about how you can provide the time, space, and technical assistance to enable people to do this effectively will be important. And again, this could be online training or in person, depending on what the components are. But again, doing a lot of intentional planning about who needs this training and how they can get that training to best support students. Once the assessment has been administered, of course, it's important to think about how you're going to engage students in that assessment. So providing really clear examples and language of how the assessment is important to students. So giving the administrators, again, that language to then relay to students about why they're doing this, why it's important, and how it can help them. And then providing those guidance and structures to support assessment and administrators in reviewing the test results for students. So providing, again, those that guidance so that they're really able to support students in unpacking and understanding what the results of the assessment are in the short term. And this is really important, of course, for building student buy-in, as well as ensuring that the assessment administrators feel comfortable doing these tasks. And then in the long term, we know that, as Caroline mentioned, assessment results are most effective when students can continue to engage with the results long after the initial assessment and debrief. So by integrating the student results into the curriculum or using a purchased curriculum, they can build a deeper understanding of the possible career options and see those connections between their classroom experiences and those long-term goals. So developing guidance on how the assessment results can be integrated into your current practices. Maybe that means research topics in other courses. Maybe it means presentations that students can make. There are lots of different ways, but providing that clear guidance can help make sure that that actually happens. And then providing opportunities for the assessment to be used in advising conversations with students regarding course selection or in developing their 6-year plans. So again, being able to bridge that between the courses they're taking now, their future courses in high school, and then their long-term plans and beyond. During COVID, we know that you may need to be sharing some of this information virtually. So thinking about how you're going to be able to share student results electronically with other teachers may be a data governance or privacy component that you'll need to think through as well. That does complicate some of this a little bit when it's harder to, it may potentially be harder to have those face-to-face conversations. Does anyone have questions about the implementation strategies?
So I do see one of our participants said that they teach career exploration to all 9th grade students. And that is, it kind of gets to the when of these assessments. That is great. As to an earlier point that was made, students, it's good practice for students to be coming back to their results and the things that they're learning about themselves and career opportunities over and over again throughout middle and high school. I will say that this bill does, the language in the bill does state that the career assessment should first be implemented in either 7th or 8th grade. And the purpose of that is to we know that students are making decisions, before they end their 8th grade year about the courses that they will be taking in high school. And these career assessments can play a big role in giving students the information they need to make those course selections. And sometimes that's even happening when CTE courses are offered in the middle school level, or there are prerequisites that a student needs to take in 8th grade. that is why it can be helpful for them to take it in a career assessment in 7th grade to then be informed to make those decisions before the end of their 7th grade year. So that is an important piece that the emphasis is on taking this assessment in 7th or 8th grade. We do see, I see one says, for middle school implementation, are there outcome explainers provided to parents separately? Do parents also receive results, or is this integrated into parent-teacher conferences? It's a great question. There are some of the programs and platforms that we've listed that do have components where there's an interface for parents or guardians so that families can see students' results and kind of see the connections that they're making then to their course selection and things like that. Those generally are going to cost more. So some of the higher cost platforms include more features like that allow parents and guardians to interact with students' data as well. And so that is definitely something to be considering when you're choosing. And a great point is that if that's not a part of the assessment or a part of the program that is already incorporated into that technology and that software, that it is something that you are, like Molly was saying, thinking about in terms of who else this data is shared with. Families are a really important stakeholder to be a part of these conversations, and so I'm really glad that you brought that up. Password before we get cut off. The password. Yeah. Go ahead, Molly.
So thank you. I know we are just about out of time. We did have some questions. If you want to share with us any kind of additional support that we as the state can provide to more effectively implement career assessments in your schools, we don't right now have the budget to kind of, at the state level, to purchase one of these assessments for the entire state, but if there are other kinds of support structures that we can provide, let us know. And feel free to share with us anything that any barriers that you've seen that have kind of kept you from implementing an assessment. But thank you so much. If this is the code word Harmony to fill out the session survey. If you have specific questions or you want us to take a look at an assessment that you're using that you believe meets the criteria, feel free to reach out to Caroline. She'll be able to help support you on that. And if there's anything else that we can do to help you as you start to think about implementing these, definitely let us know.
Thanks, everyone. So great to have you in this session. Have a great rest of your Friday. Session ID, Molly, do you have that? Someone's asking for the session.
It's not that Harmony word. Session ID, let's see.
There might, there's a number.
See if I can find it. The session code.
That could be it.
HWNJ4.
Oh, yep. Royce Ferris, thank you. Faster than us.
Thanks. Any other questions that have come through, Caroline? I think they officially cut us off. I know someone's raising their hand. I can't actually call on you if you're raising your hand. Unfortunately, you have to type your question into the chat box.
I have a suggestion that, or a reminder that we need to upload our PowerPoint. We can make sure we do that.
Yep.
I think that's it.
All right. I think it's Christy Morgan who's raising their hand. I can't.
Who's raising their hand?
Christy Morgan.
Christy Morgan. Not seeing her.
right, well, feel free to email us, Christy, if you have a question. I'm sorry, I'm not able. I wish that we could like have a real discussion. That's a really hard thing about these virtual sessions. So thank you for joining us anyway.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks. Do I just hit end at the bottom?
Yeah, we can hit